Yuji would face off against Mahito in the subway, already landing a blow on him. All Yuji felt right now was immense amounts of rage that he wanted to release on Mahito. Rage for all the death that Sukuna had caused in that one moment, and rage towards himself for not being able to stop Sukuna from taking control. At the same time on the surface, Megumi was trying to find Yuji, while Kashimo and Nobara were preparing to face off against one of Mahito's double, thinking it was the real Mahito. Both battles began right at the same time with all the opponents rushing towards each other. As Mahito that was facing off against Yuji lifted up two of their transfigured humans, releasing them and changing their shape and form into that of a worm to attempt to slam into Yuji. But Yuji was quick to jump over the worm, focusing a large amount of curse energy towards his fist, even greater than what he was using against Shoso, before punching the massive conglomeration of flesh, launching it as well as Mahito through the floor. As Mahito blinked, he was caught off guard by that sudden burst of power. And Mahito was near certain of this now. He had to make sure that Yuji wasn't going to get anywhere close to him, as Mahito hopped out from the worm right before Yuji had landed and gone right through it. Mahito then lifted up both of his arms, shapeshifting them both to be like machine guns, and now starting to rapid fire several transfigured humans right towards Yuji's direction. Yuji began to duck and weave around each of them, and the ones that got close he deflected right back towards Mahito's direction. And in what felt like no time at all, Yuji managed to close the gap between Mahito and himself, before landing a punch right on Mahito's face that sent Mahito flying back a couple of feet. However, it wasn't hitting as hard as he was expecting, as Mahito smirked a little bit and said, "If you're going to use divergent fists against me, you might as well not bother. I'm aware of your abilities now." After all, we felt that hit was not as powerful as Yuji should have been, so if Yuji was using the divergent fist, it would make a lot of sense. But mid-sentence, Yuji closed the gap again, landing a punch this time on his stomach at that same level of power, which caused Mahito to cough up a little bit of blood, before he refocused himself and at the last moment he was able to block a third blow from Yuji. But even though he was capable of blocking that blow, Yuji was quick to follow that up with another, aiming a punch this time to his side, before Mahito opened his mouth as a spike rose out trying to impale Yuji, but Yuji was able to duck underneath it and uppercut Mahito hard in the jaw. And the moment that he made contact with the jaw, that blow was much harder. However, at the same time, Mahito felt pain all across his body. Pain on his arm, pain on his side, pain on his stomach, and most of all pain on his face. Mahito had realized now Yuji was able to use his divergent fist several times in one move. While Mahito was already certain about it before, he was even more certain now. He couldn't risk Yuji getting close to him for even a moment. As he thought for a moment on how did Yuji manage to get this strong? Sure, Mahito had predictions for how strong he was expecting Yuji to get, but it wasn't this far. But Mahito shook it off. So long as he kept his range, he felt he still had a good way to win. Plus, he knew Yuji still most definitely had a weakness. He was still way too human. Something Mahito knew he could most definitely take advantage of. Mahito locked eyes with Yuji for a second, before he decided to wave to him and start to run away. As he was running, two massive pillars made out of human flesh launched right towards Yuji, trying to keep a distance between the two of them. And that made Yuji blink a little bit in confusion, but he wasn't going to stop now, ducking underneath the first pillar before lifting up his hands and catching the second one, before punching it and launching it right back towards Mahito's direction. Meanwhile, Kashimo and Nobara were preparing to face off against the double of Mahito. Kashimo and Nobara had a rather simple plan. Kashimo was going to paralyze Mahito repeatedly and allow Nobara to land some openings. Ever since the battle against Mahito, they had been speculating about how they could hit him. From what they knew, Kashimo and Megumi had no chance to be able to hit them. However, Nobara might have had a chance at this, which led to Kashimo quickly closing the distance. This speed that they had access to even surprised Mahito, as Kashimo closed the distance with the double, landing a palm strike right on their chest. It wasn't the power that was an issue for him, no, it was the electrical properties of Kashimo's curse energy. While Kashimo wasn't capable of physically hurting Mahito, that stun factor was going to matter to him no matter what. After all, it didn't target one small part of the body, but the full body itself. As Mahito then lifted up his hand, attempting to extend it heavily into that of a spear, but Kashimo was able to slide underneath it and palm strike Mahito again. Kashimo would be able to dodge Mahito under normal circumstances, but with this both being a clone and Kashimo's stun ability, it was helping even further. Before Kashimo spun right around Mahito and landed a kick right on the back of his head. As Kashimo then said, "It's a shame, really. Yuji won't be able to kill you himself. As much as I would normally keep you alive for that, you're a bit too much of a threat to risk that." And with that kick to the head, he jumped backwards, as Nobara took her turn to strike. As Nobara closed the distance while activating resonance on her nail, slamming it right into Mahito's stomach. And at the same time, the Mahito was trying to run away from Yuji to enter into a new room in the subway suddenly felt a massive hit land on their stomach, while what looked like a massive nail impale rose out from it. And at first Mahito thought that might have been Yuji's divergent fist, but it was never that sharp. Yuji and Mahito were both able to realize at that same time that that was Nobara. More importantly, it was even more dangerous, considering the fact that that meant Nobara was capable of hurting him. Mahito realized he was going to need to call back his double and fast. That would be his only way to stand somewhat of a chance against Yuji. But before Mahito could enter into the next room, Yuji suddenly passed him in speed and punched him right in the face, sending him right back to the previous room they were fighting in. Yuji had no idea what Mahito was planning or why he was trying to go to another room, but he was not going to let that happen. At the same time, Nobara called out the Mahito double as a clone, and Mahito confirmed that it was completely correct. But that was when the clone chose to run away, running in the same direction that Megumi was heading to. Or at least he tried to, until Kashimo closed the distance and stopped him, kicking Mahito right back towards the direction of Nobara. In terms of physical stats amplified by curse energy, Kashimo and Yuji were near equals. And while Yuji definitely had the harder punch, Kashimo was the faster between the two of them. And Nobara was already preparing another nail with resonance, while at the same time Yuji was preparing to land his next punch, which led to the double having to act fast. The double knew that if they got hit by Nobara's blow, it would end up sending damage back to the real Mahito, and it would make things even worse for him when he's battling against Yuji. Which led to the double having an idea, and either way this was going to hurt Mahito, but it wouldn't hurt him as bad as getting hit by another one of those resonance. Cause right when the resonance nail was an inch from the clone's body, the clone exploded. While Mahito wasn't going to get his full soul back, another one of those resonance hits towards his body would definitely be bad. And that made both Nobara and Kashimo blink. They were a little bit surprised to see that happen, and Kashimo had to very quickly move out of the way of the resonance nail coming towards him since they were no longer having a Mahito in the way. However, the two of them were very quick to realize something. Nobara's resonance was very effective against the Mahito double. So without a moment of hesitation, Kashimo quickly picked up Nobara and started to run right towards Yuji's direction. Which at first caught Nobara off guard, but Nobara continued to guide him, confirming that Mahito was also there. Meanwhile, Mahito was caught off guard by the fact his clone had suddenly died. But he didn't have time to think, as Yuji suddenly landed a punch right on Mahito's face, sending him rocketing through several of the chairs. And you could see in Yuji's eyes there was a newfound look of determination, mainly because Yuji had now realized he wasn't alone. Mahito was realizing he most certainly underestimated them. After all, not just was Yuji strong, but Nobara and Kashimo were both incredibly strong as well. If it wasn't for the fact that Mahito was immune to damage, that clone probably would have died or sooner to Kashimo's hits. Not to mention the fact that Mahito was at far less than 50% of his soul HP. From both the blows he'd taken from Nobara and Yuji and his clone having to die so fast, he wasn't too sure what he could even do right now. When he measured it more properly, he was closer to somewhere around 30% of his soul HP, maybe even lower. And he hadn't even landed a single blow on Yuji. Thoughts were racing through Mahito's head. He was trying to think, what could he do? What could he do to win this fight? And a thought came into Mahito's head for a second. Sure, he'd gotten close to death several times, but not against every single opponent. He never always had a chance for inspiration. That was because of his ability to make himself immune to all damage, done by reshaping his soul. But as a result of that, the only times where he really needed to adjust his combat style to make himself be able to fight someone who could hit him was Yuji. That must have been a crutch for him. Maybe, just maybe, if he didn't have that ability, he would have been able to get even stronger before Shibuya. Maybe he would have been able to motivate himself more in the midst of combat to create more things on the verge of death. Mahito still also had several transfigured humans with him as well. Humans that he was keeping in storage to maybe use against Yuji, but he felt that none of this would be enough, especially with the knowledge that Kashimo and Nobara were on their way as well. And Megumi Fushiguro, the one who wielded a domain. But with desperation came improvement, and most of all, inspiration. All of these thoughts and realizations happened in a total of 1 second, as Yuji quickly closed the distance between himself and Mahito, attempting to land another blow on him. However, before he could, 2 transfigured humans came out from Mahito's mouth, as Mahito activated a life-sacrificing binding vow on them to have them both explode. This binding vow combination was enough to launch Yuji backwards, and give Mahito enough time to prepare for his next move. As Mahito erupted, a cocoon of what looked like flesh erupting from his body. This cocoon caused so much force that it shattered the entire ceiling above them, fully exposing the moonlight and causing the entire area to shake. As Yuji quickly jumped out from the subway. As the cocoon then compacted back on Mahito. And he looked rather different, evolved in a way, more muscular, several scales around his body. Any track you could see was replaced by some black liquid. This was Mahito's true form, created on the brink of death using the humans he still had stored within him to upgrade himself. Amplified by a binding vow to remove one of his own abilities. To remove the ability to change the shape of his soul to not take damage from people that were incapable of targeting the soul. For power, speed, and durability. Now this wasn't the full true core of his soul, he had to use binding vows in order to amplify it to try and reach such a level, but still, Mahito had reached an even stronger point than what he was expecting. As Yuji and Mahito locked eyes for a second before they both jumped towards each other, both of them clashing fists, causing a shockwave to echo through the area. As both Mahito and Yuji were launched away from each other before they closed the distance again, repeatedly clashing fists with each other. Now they were fighting on a much more even playing field. Before Yuji ducked underneath one of Mahito's blows and landed a full power punch on Mahito's face, pushing him back but nowhere near as far in comparison to before. With that, Mahito lifting up one of his hands and launching at one of his transfigured humans, using it to grab onto Yuji and pull him into a punch, which sent Yuji back by about 3 meters. The two of them were relatively even in terms of power, but Yuji knew he had an advantage if that was the case. After all, between the two of them, Yuji knew he had the superior hand-to-hand capabilities. It was going to be a massive slugfest, but he knew he was likely going to win this so long as he kept pushing forward. But if Yuji could pull off landing a Black Flash, it might be able to weaken Mahito even further. That was what he needed to go for. But Mahito felt it himself. He knew it was possible for him to land a Black Flash. he was going to need to push himself against his opponent. This jump he just did was only to be on the same level and playing field as him. Mahito knew he needed to surpass him, and he was going to do anything he could to surpass Yuji. As Mahito and Yuji were about to rush towards each other again, however, before Mahito and Yuji had closed distance between each other, suddenly a large crash landed on Mahito as well as a massive amount of weight. And Yuji saw something in front of him that caught him off guard, however it did make him smile a little bit. Megumi Fushiguro had arrived. Megumi was currently standing on top of Inoue. He knew he had to keep a distance between himself and Mahito. After all, if Mahito got close to him, he could touch him and potentially kill him in one blow. However, a Shikigami user like himself, that was no issue, as Mahito slowly began to lift up Max Elephant, or at least he was trying to until suddenly it disappeared. As Megumi flew closer in order to touch Max Elephant and turn them back into shadows, which a sudden weight change ended up catching Mahito completely off guard, and left Mahito open to getting punched in the face by Yuji. Due to catching Mahito off guard, was able to send him flying back a couple of feet. As Megumi flew over to Yuji and asked who this guy was. Yuji explained this was Mahito in some mutated form. He was much more physically powerful than he was before, however he feels like if he were to break that armor off of him, he might actually be able to demolish him. After all, when Yuji was fighting against Mahito before he awakened this form, Yuji was already breaking his body and destroying him. Megumi gave them the thumbs up, but he told them that Nobara and Kashimo were already on their way to back them up. Mahito heard that as well, as that made a concern rise onto his face, especially if they were to figure out what he had done in order to make this form as powerful as it was. As Megumi thought what his next move should be for a couple of moments before an idea came, as he lifted up both of his hands and casted his domain expansion. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't do something so daring against Mahito, but he knew he had one advantage. Mahito was not going to use his domain expansion so long as Yuji was here, which meant Megumi had free reigns to use his domain expansion, even against someone who he knew would beat him in a domain clash. And Yuji, seeing that, was definitely able to get an idea of what Megumi was planning. Megumi was about to play the role of support, to try and create a bunch of openings for Yuji to land. And this angered Mahito to no end. He needed to find a way to get out of here now. He needed to separate them so he could kill Megumi. He could still use Auto Transfiguration, he just needed to get close to them, but considering his domain expansion was now active, it was going to be much harder. But he didn't have much time to think, as suddenly he felt several tongues wrap around his legs. And when he looked below him, he could see the eyes of several frogs. But the second was all that Yuji needed, as he closed the distance and landed another punch right on Mahito's face. Now Yuji was aiming for that crack he made beforehand with that punch he landed on Mahito. If he could land enough damage to that crack, he might be able to break it and make a weak spot for him to be able to take him out. And while Mahito was being launched back, suddenly he saw 3 Megumis rise all around him. All 3 of them were attempting to strike Mahito at once, as Mahito lifted up both of his arms to block 2 of the arms while using his leg to kick away one of the Megumis. But as the Megumi clone was being pushed back, Yuji jumped right over the Megumi clone, and used that chance to land a punch right on Mahito's chest. And now Mahito was getting attacked by all 3 sides. He had to deal with 2 Megumis on his sides while Yuji was attempting to rush him, and at the same time the Megumi clone was also joining in with that rush. All the while, the main Megumi was remaining on Inoue, flying in the air and figuring out ways to support. And also analyzing Mahito's body, as there was something quite odd that he was starting to notice. For some reason, Mahito was choosing to block all of their attacks, or at least trying his best to. Now it wasn't a struggle considering he was fighting against 4 opponents at once, but he was still trying his best to block. Based on what he knew, Mahito should likely just only be trying to block Yuji's attacks. After all, it's not like Megumi's attacks would be able to do any damage to him. And at that moment, it clicked for him. Before the 3 Megumi clones then vanished, turning back into shadowy puddles, allowing Yuji and Mahito to go in hand-to-hand clashes with each other. Until suddenly, Mahito felt a massive slash against his back. It wasn't anything too hard, but it still caused a bit of damage, and that confirmed it for Megumi. As now Divine Dog was right behind Mahito as well. Megumi did not have a sure hit with his domain, so he wouldn't be able to hit Mahito normally. As Megumi then explained that Mahito did something to this form to make it so he would take damage from everything normally and not be able to change the shape of his soul, which meant now everything was capable of damaging Mahito. And upon hearing that, a smile came onto Yuji, not because it would affect how he would fight, but because it would affect how everyone else would fight, and it would allow everyone to be able to fight against Mahito. Which, speaking of, suddenly all of them saw what looked like a staff land down from the sky, one that landed right in front of Mahito. As someone landed behind him, as Kashimo moved his hand right next to Mahito's back, with a wide smirk rising on Kashimo as he said, "So this'll hurt you then, right?" Before he discharged the electricity charged up in his baton, releasing a lightning bolt that went right towards Kashimo's hand, and by extension went through Mahito's chest, making a hole go through Mahito's chest as he began to regenerate that part of his body. Though even regenerating something like this would end up taking some time he was not going to have against these 3 fighters. Wait a minute, someone was with Kashimo beforehand. But he didn't have much time to focus on that, as Yuji rushed right towards him, cursed energy surrounding his fist, and more importantly, Mahito could get a feeling in the air. He could sense it. This next bullet Yuji was about to land would be a black flash. However, a moment before Mahito could move to counter, suddenly 3 nails hit Mahito in the back. as Nobara snapped her fingers and activated Resonance, landing another blow on Mahito to weaken him even further. As Mahito was about to turn and look away in order to try and hit Nobara, but his attention was lost for way too long. As Yuji closed distance and landed a black flash right on Mahito's face, completely shattering his armor and sending him rocketing right through the area. This spell was so powerful it even managed to send Mahito out from Megumi's domain, as Megumi deactivated his own domain, flying down on Nue. And all four of them were starting to approach Mahito. Mahito could feel it. This is where he was going to die. However, unfortunately for them, Mahito had a much worse fate in store, as a massive wave of cursed spirits erupted from the ground, going right towards Yuji, Kashimo, Nobara, and Megumi. And they couldn't count how many. It had to be somewhere over 1,000. Until from the ground, Kenjaku rose out as well, as he lifted up his hand right over Mahito and captured him with cursed spirit manipulation. Though Kenjaku wasn't really happy about this either, he was going to need to hold out for just a little bit more time. Just a little bit more time for the prison realm to be ready. But he had to make this move or else he was going to risk the death of Mahito, and Mahito was necessary for his plan. Kashimo, Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi all spotted their new enemy, as they each jumped backwards in order to avoid this massive wave of cursed spirits coming towards them. He was the one responsible for taking Satoru Gojo, which means they were going to need to kill him in order to make sure they could free him, as all four of them prepared to begin their rush right towards Kenjaku. Yuji and Kashimo would face off against... No. It's Kashima's a fucking enemy. What am I doing? Wait, he's not an enemy. No, he's an ally. This is what if Kashima's reborn in the modern era? They're like best friends here. What am I doing? Now up next, I do want to spend some time talking about the sponsor to the channel, Fan Dominion, an old friend of the channel that has a ton of cool anime merch, especially on the JJK side of things, but cool merch overall. And if you're looking for something that looks stylish, something that you can wear out in public and not be called a weeb for, but at the same time be recognized by your friends for wearing something really cool, they have good things in store for you. Or are you looking for something to complete your cosplay with? Well, Fan Dominion has you covered, and don't worry, they aren't expensive at all. And on top of that, if you use my code both in the description as well as on screen now, you can get a 10% discount. Yep, that's right, a 10% discount. However, now I'm going to spend some time showing off their beautiful catalog. And if you like any of this merch and any of this merch looks awesome to you, remember our code EF10 and you'll be able to get a 10% discount. Anyways, I'm going to see y'all later.